Before I acted, I watched one thing. Not the plan, not the timing, not the consequences. And once I realized what that one thing actually was, my decisions stopped feeling like guesses and started feeling like inevitabilities. If you're watching this, there's a strong chance you've felt it too. That moment right before you act. That silent pause where something inside tightens or relaxes. Where one option feels heavy and forced, and another feels strangely neutral, almost obvious. Most people believe action creates results. They believe better choices lead to better outcomes. But that's not what actually determines what happens next. Because action doesn't shape reality. The observer behind the action does. And today, I'm going to show you the one variable almost no one notices, the silent factor that decides whether your actions move you forward or trap you in the same repeating loop, wearing different disguises. Stay with me, because once you see this, you won't be able to act the same way ever again. For most of my life, I thought decisions were about logic. You analyze, you weigh options, you try to predict outcomes, you choose the path that seems safest, smartest, or most efficient. And when things don't work, you assume you chose wrong. So you try again, you think harder, you optimize more. But something strange kept happening. Even when I made good decisions, my reality kept circling back to the same patterns. Different people, different situations, same emotional ending. That's when I realized something unsettling. It wasn't what I was choosing. It was from where I was choosing. Because every decision is made from a position, a state of consciousness, an identity silently watching the situation unfold. And that observer determines far more than the action itself. Most people never question who is watching their choices. They assume the observer is neutral. It's not. The observer is always biased, conditioned, loaded with memory, fear, expectation, and identity. And until you see the observer, every action you take will unknowingly reinforce the same timeline. This is why people say they're changing, but their life keeps repeating. And this is where everything began to shift for me. Before every action, there is a moment most people rush past, a microsecond where awareness either tightens or opens. That moment is where reality is decided, not later, not after the result, right there. I started noticing something subtle. Before actions that led to struggle, friction, or regret, my body was contracted, not dramatically, not painfully, just enough to be ignored. A slight urgency, a pressure to act, a sense of, I need to do something now. Before actions that led to expansion, flow, or clarity, there was something else. Neutrality, spaciousness, a quiet certainty that didn't need justification. The action itself often looked similar from the outside, but the observer was completely different. One observer was acting to escape discomfort. The other was acting from coherence. Most people believe fear is loud. It's not. Fear is efficient. It hides inside rational thinking, inside urgency, inside this makes sense. And when fear is observing the decision, the action becomes an attempt to control the future. Control is the signature of mistrust, and mistrust collapses reality into repetition. This is why people stay busy but don't move forward. They act constantly, but always from the same observer. I realized something critical. The universe doesn't respond to action. It responds to state. Action is just the physical echo of a frequency that already exists. So I stopped asking, what should I do? And I started asking a different question. Who is watching this choice right now? At first, the answer was uncomfortable. Sometimes the observer was fear. Sometimes it was the need for validation. Sometimes it was the identity that needed to prove something. And here's the part most people miss. You cannot outact a misaligned observer. You can make perfect moves from a distorted state and still collapse the same outcome. Because the observer doesn't just watch the decision. The observer is the decision. This is why two people can take the same action and get radically different results. Not because one is luckier, because one is acting from coherence and the other from compensation. I began experimenting, not with outcomes, with awareness. Before sending a message, before making a commitment, before saying yes or no, I paused, not to think, to feel. I watched the internal posture. Was there tension? Was there urgency? Was there a subtle, if I don't do this, something bad will happen? If so, I didn't act. Not because the action was wrong, but because the observer was. This is where most people misunderstand this principle. They think waiting is passive. It's not. Waiting without awareness is delay. Waiting with awareness is precision. I wasn't waiting for certainty. I was waiting for coherence. And coherence feels different than confidence. Confidence needs reinforcement. Coherence doesn't. Coherence feels quiet, almost boring. Which is why the ego hates it. The ego wants drama. It wants urgency. It wants movement to prove existence. But reality doesn't move for drama. It moves for alignment. As I practiced this, something unexpected happened. My actions decreased, but my results multiplied. I said less. I did less. I forced nothing. And doors opened anyway. Not because I tried harder, but because the observer shifted. I was no longer acting at reality. I was moving with it. This is where the quantum principle becomes experiential. Observation collapses possibility, but not observation as attention, observation as identity. Who you are while watching the moment determines which timeline solidifies. Most people observe life as someone who is missing something, so reality keeps reflecting absence. When you observe as someone complete, action becomes clean. No residue, no karmic loop, no energetic debt. The decision doesn't pull you into the future. It unfolds naturally. This is why forcing decisions feels exhausting. You're not tired because of the action. You're tired because the observer is fragmented. By watching the observer instead of the options, I stopped creating friction. And friction was never outside. It was the internal resistance between who I was being and what I was trying to make happen. Once that resistance dissolved, decisions stopped being stressful. They became obvious, not because life became simpler, but because perception became clearer. And clarity doesn't shout, it whispers. Here's what I learned. Before you act, there is always a choice deeper than the action itself. The choice of who is watching. If you act from urgency, you reinforce urgency. If you act from fear, you extend fear. If you act from lack, you guarantee lack, no matter how smart the move looks. But when you act from coherence, reality responds differently. Not dramatically, not instantly, but inevitably. Because coherence collapses timelines cleanly. So the next time you feel stuck, don't ask what to do. Pause. Watch who is watching. That's the lever. That's the point of power. And once you learn to observe before you act, you stop repeating timelines and start stepping into new ones without force. This is not about hesitation. It's about precision. And once you master this, action stops being risky. Because you're no longer acting blindly. You're acting from alignment. And reality always recognizes that.